So there you have it. Graham Potter is gone. Chelsea sack a manager who notoriously says that he needs time for these things, notoriously is a good guy, and is notoriously someone who is innovative within football. All of the things that you would necessarily want a new manager to be. But Chelsea have very specific needs, and in particular, I think Todd Boehly and this new Chelsea regime have very specific needs for what they need from a manager. And that requires a specific kind of specialization. Now, we can talk about the relationship. Let's just get some of that out the way between Graham Potter and the players, Graham Potter and the squad, Graham Potter and the manager, right? Graham Potter was brought in, midway through is not even a fair representation of it. It was quite early on in the season, and he left a very decent job in which he was doing a very reasonable job. Since then, De Zerbi has come in and done a very, very good job indeed, showing that maybe the Brighton structure is something that A, other clubs should be looking at, but B, is also something which is very conducive to good management. He came in, he started to have a bit of a glow up, things were looking pretty good, he was clearly feeling very good about himself, and he was given a grace period, right? And that was very often by people like me who weren't Chelsea fans, right? Because very often when you want to talk about grace periods, when you want to talk about, hey, give the guy time, it's because you don't have much emotional investment in that. But behind the scenes already, bubbling away, there was an element of, is this guy the Chelsea manager that we want? Is this guy the guy that we want to take us into the new era of what is going on at Chelsea? And we didn't necessarily know. We didn't necessarily know whether Graham Potter had the credentials. And you know what? I'm not sure whether we even do now. Graham Potter was always a decent manager at Brighton, but there seemed to be a bit of a ceiling as to what was happening. And weirdly, Brighton was always blamed for that. His tactics were fantastic. He masterminded so many of these what were considered to be underdog performances against other much better teams, or at least perceived better teams in the Premier League. And the tactics seemed to be the kind of tactics that a top 4/top 6 manager and coaching staff should be implementing, and therefore it made him a desirable asset. It put him into the maybe category for so many teams. But a lot of teams hadn't pulled the trigger like Chelsea had. And when Chelsea pulled the trigger, it was because they were getting rid of Thomas Tuchel. They needed someone that represented something at the other end of the elastic band scale. Tuchel was not a man of pleasing the players. He was someone who came in with a lot of issues around personal spats with players. Very often he would turn things into more personal issues when they actually were work issues. And overall, you'd say that Graham Potter represented the opposite of that. He seemed to be very much a man of the people. First of all, he was English, so he was always going to go down with the press very well. But he was also someone who seemed to have a holistic relationship with the players. Players seemed to get him. They seemed to want to play for him. And they always seemed to want to run through brick walls for a guy. Now, that is what you want from a new manager. And not only that, but it was sort of a progressive style of football. It was a style of football that was usurping what other good managers were doing. But when he came in, he wasn't able to implement it quickly. And they were spending money faster than they could implement it out on the pitch. With over £500 million spent in the early era of Todd Boehly, it was not a good representation of what Chelsea were capable of. Now, you could say that Todd Boehly set this guy up for a fall. It was a transitional manager away from a previous era. This is almost equivalent to the David Moyes-esque type performances that they first had when Sir Alex Ferguson left, because Sir Alex was so much of the structure that happened at the club. He was so much of the daily comings and goings of what was going on. And so when so much changes, and you obviously bring someone else in who's also trying to change things, you end up with just too much wheels going in different directions, cogs turning and not exactly lining up together. And you end up with players who look frustrated, players who maybe don't want to be there in the long or short term, players who are confused about their role, players who are confused about tactics. And suddenly a manager who was never famous for scoring a lot of goals anyway, but having very solid, well-liked, eye-test passing performances, was under a lot of pressure to do things that he wasn't brought in initially to, that he shouldn't have been perceived to have been brought in to do, right? So this was kind of a situation that was never going to favour Graham Potter in the first place. He is a good manager. He is someone who will go on to perform at other clubs. Obviously, the Spurs job is now open. Maybe there is a possibility that Graham Potter just walks straight into a Spurs job. But on the other side of that, there are also other great posts open, and maybe Graham Potter wants to take a bit of time away from the game. He will come back to the game. He will be brilliant. It's just, there is the other element here. Chelsea have become a different club to what they were in the 90s. In the 90s, they were a European attractive football. We're the sexy place to be in West London. We're like the cool blues. We're the guys who have like the suave Italians and the cultured Dutchman. We are the team that attract some of the best people in the world and some of the people who want to be at the heart of London life. When Roman Abramovich came in, that playboy attitude didn't go. They brought in Jose Mourinho. They had a whole load of guys who were arrogant, who swaggered around, who looked like they represented Chelsea, who represented a lot of those fans as well. There was a bit of a hard element to them. They weren't West Ham, they weren't Arsenal, they were Chelsea. And so when you're then trying to change a bit of that, when you are then coming in as Graham Potter, there is a real issue. You don't seem to correlate to any of the previous things. But then nor does Todd Bowley really correlate to so much to do with Roman Abramovich, apart from possibly the fact that he also has a lot of money. How he got it, the kind of person that he is, the administrative elements of what he is trying to achieve at Chelsea aren't exactly clear yet, to be honest. And the real frustration, I guess, for him is he's walking into Chelsea, he's walking into his box and he's hearing, this guy doesn't represent us. Do you think this represents us? He's having question marks put over him, the brand new owner of Chelsea, who managed to amass so much of a wealth that could even buy the club in the first place, that there must have been an element of frustration. New billionaires at clubs don't like being questioned. They want their decisions to be followed. They want everything to go through the way that they want it to go. And they want their decisions to be the thing that they hang their hat on in the end. Hey, you came in and you changed things. You were better than Roman Abramovich. But the chat here is, he's not better than Roman Abramovich. Roman Abramovich got us this. Roman Abramovich was willing to bend rules to get this. He put so much money into the club. He did this, he did that. He made the right decision. Rose-tinted glasses will always not favour the new billionaire over the previous billionaire, unless the previous billionaire really didn't win anything. But you kind of get my point here, right? And so Graham Potter was up against it. And then when the players aren't scoring, when you bring in quality players, but quality players who clearly need time, a player like João Felix who is on loan, a player like João Felix who then they put it on him to be the main goal scorer. Kai Havertz just behind that, maybe a Mason Mount, maybe a Ziyech. There's a couple of players in the squad who aren't happy. There are still players in the squad who aren't happy, who need turning over and turning out. There are still people in the squad who aren't sure what their role is. They keep someone like Hakim Ziyech, who clearly doesn't want to be at the club. They do kind of weird things. They have a massive squad that seems untenable. They have a massive squad that needs turning over in the summer anyway. There are all sorts of issues around the squad, is what I'm saying. And so relationships with the club are poor, let alone relationships with the manager. Sacking the manager is taking away a symptom of what is wrong at Chelsea right now, right? And I get it. Like, I don't know if Graham Potter was the perfect fit for Chelsea. I think he's a great fit as a Premier League manager. I think he will do well at another club. I don't know if he can manage those huge stars like other people maybe want to. But then, did we also think the same of someone like Eddie Howe? Did we put the same questions on Eddie Howe when it failed at Bournemouth? Yes. Did we then come to stupid conclusions which were situational rather than long-term? Yes. So I'm saying to you now, I think Graham Potter should have been backed. But at the same time, I totally get the logic of not backing Graham Potter. I totally get the logic of going, you know what, it's just not a good fit. Like, you're meant to be our lead man here, and we're looking for Brad Pitt, not Ryan Gosling. We're looking for another Mourinho because that is what people have been conditioned to want at Chelsea. There is an element of conditioning in Chelsea fans right now. There is an element of the emperor's new clothes, where if the guy swaggers in the way that he's meant to be swaggering, you say that you see what he's meant to be. But that wind can change very quickly at any club. But specifically at Chelsea, it seems to change very quickly because the previous owner was willing to indulge some of those pangs that people get when they see a manager not doing so well. There was a precedent set as soon as even Mourinho was sacked, but other managers have been left to rot for not very long, and they've probably had their moment in the sun. And that moment in the sun is still probably going. Managers have been sacked when they're doing relatively well. So Graham Potter doing this, Graham Potter obviously not getting top four is a real problem. Finances for the club are going to be a real thing for a guy who is an administrator. But at the same time, he wants to be lauded as a new hero. But Graham Potter's now gone. I don't feel it represents what Graham Potter is going to achieve. And they've got an interim guy who is his guy anyway. So I don't think it represents him. I also don't think it represents this Chelsea, but there are some red flags around what is going on at Chelsea right now. Some of them I think are red flags from previous eras that we are now digging up and going, oh, look, like that red flag there, like that, yeah, that's a real issue. Is that an Abramovich red flag or is that a Bowley red flag? Todd Bowley has a lot to change here, but he's also making questionable kind of, on the line decisions that he doesn't really need to make. And he's putting a squad and a club in jeopardy which was probably already in jeopardy in some sense, but almost needlessly, by making rash, huge spending decisions and getting in players who are quality, but might not necessarily fit together without those other pieces around them. These squads fit together in weird ways. Like, Pep Guardiola always likes a certain makeup of his team. Jurgen Klopp's side has recently fallen apart after going for a quad the previous season. Arsenal didn't look anywhere near it until they got a couple of finishing pieces and they're over the line. They get the coaching, bam, stick with them and they're good. That seems to be the current air within the Premier League. But maybe Chelsea, as always, being contrarians, being the kind of people who want to go against the culture, being the kind of people who aren't afraid to upset people in the Premier League, maybe want to do things differently to everyone else. I'm not saying it won't work. I'm saying this is probably a good time if you're going to get rid of Potter to get rid of him. You're going into a Champions League game next. The players might feel a little relieved, but that doesn't always work. And if you've got a guy who is still a Potter proxy, then what next? Are you really going to change all that much if Potter is still there and kind of the DNA is still there in the day-to-day goings on in terms of, well, you're still similar to him. There's Nagelsmann sitting there. There are plenty of other good managers. There's even Conte sitting there. There are plenty of other good managers sitting out there going, hey, I'm at a loose end come the end of this season. It could be Carlo Ancelotti. It could be plenty of different names. Do you want to go back to the past, Chelsea fans? Do you want to get the same guys before? Or do you want someone new? Do you want to change? Do you want it to be a little bit different? Do you want to represent something different now in football? Or are you happy being the old Chelsea under Abramovich? There's still a few people who are hanging on to that Abramovich era and some of the impact of that Abramovich era as if it was a good thing. Success is not and here's the thing, success is not the only measure of a club. I get the Premier League table and we always go, well, he's here in the Premier League, therefore X. In the short term, sure, they're there in the Premier League. They could have been much higher next season. We all never know now. But I'm saying in the short and long term, things look different. In the short term, it should never be results-based in football. In the long term, it should be results-based. There was an argument that being, again, an administrative guy in Todd Bowley, maybe he's got enough of a sample size, maybe he's seen enough behind the scenes, maybe there is a deteriorating relationship between this guy in Graham Potter and everyone else at the club. Maybe they just went, look, this just isn't going to work. And maybe Graham Potter himself knew that. You could kind of see he looked a little bit resigned. You could kind of see in some of his press conferences he was sort of a little bit, not even lost, just disenchanted with what was going on. He was trying to look engaged. He was trying to look like the manager that was meant to be there for Chelsea. But I'm put it to you guys now. What do you think comes next for Chelsea? Is it a Nagelsmann? Is it a Conte? Is it someone returning? Or is it someone new, up and coming, who can revolutionise things at Chelsea and bring a new era in that's not representative of what Abramovich was? Are you ready to let go of the previous identity of Chelsea? Let me know in the comments below. Tonight is a sad night because Graham Potter is a good manager. You never like to see someone lose their job. So let me know down in the comments below and I'll chat to you guys in a little while. Much love. Bye.